The human face of the former Soviet Union, as diverse as the land is vast. Glasnost and perestroika have made a huge impact on life in the 1990s, but to what extent? Join us now as we set out to cross Russia, the Ukraine and Georgia at a time of phenomenal change. Our journey begins here in Leningrad, Venice of the North.
Majestic buildings line its shores, reminders of a Tsarist era which ended in this very city when Vladimir Ilyich Lenin led the Great October Revolution in 1917.
In the weeks ahead, we'll travel south to the seat of Russian power, Moscow, down through the Ukraine, onto the Black Sea port of Odessa, and ending up with the charismatic and very generous Georgians. But first, the magnificent city of St. Petersburg, an architectural masterpiece ordered as Russia's northern defence port almost 300 years ago by the Romanov Emperor Peter the Great. 60,000 men were recruited for the massive construction, thousands of them dying from starvation, exhaustion or disease. They say the city was built on their bones. What ultimately grew out of the swampy banks of the Neva River was one of Europe's finest cities, with hundreds of impressive buildings lining its shores. With so much opulence, any wonder there was a revolution. Beyond the beauty of this noble port, we find a population fiercely proud of their city. The rivalry with Moscow is intense. And one very stylish citizen of St. Petersburg is Nadia, our guide, impressed with the freedom of speech in the new Russia.
Of course, there are problems, but I was born here and I can't imagine living somewhere else except for this country, except for Leningrad, except for my home.
Tell us about glasnost. What does glasnost mean to you?
Glasnost is, the actual meaning of this word is openness.
Yes.
Openness of people. People can discuss. I can stand now in front of you and discussing things, and I'm not shy a bit. And you can read different viewpoints in magazines and newspapers about one thing. There is not only one official viewpoint, it's just different. And there is a lot of discussion now in the magazines and the press. This is what is glasnost.
What about Mr. Gorbachev? What do you think of him?
Oh, he has a very good reputation. He is loved by people. He is open, he is modest, he is a good leader.
Apart from politics, what sort of things do you enjoy doing with your time off?
I like to be with my family. I like to go to the country house, to the dacha. I like to go fishing with my husband, and I like to pick up mushrooms and berries, and I like knitting when I'm free. I like watching video and television.
Nadia volunteers to show us the city she loves so much. Our mode of transport, a small battered yacht. Motoring past a more substantial craft, the cruiser Aurora, we pause to reflect that from its decks a shell was fired to signal the start of the popular uprising that resulted in the formation of the modern communist state. What Nadia hadn't counted on was the sobriety of our skipper, Valentin, who's intent on tackling the smallest of St. Petersburg's 60 rivers and canals. Turning sharply into the famous Winter Canal was something we discovered he was doing for the first time.
Не надо было отпихиваться. Так, Свет, иди подержи за мост, я посажу рулевой. Свет.
I mean, what happened was the boat went right up to the side. We had the motor going in. The boat went right up to the side. I thought you were going to fall right over.
No, I thought you were grabbing hold of this and I was worried about my camera.
I was trying to save you. Just to think this is the amazing Winter Canal and we've almost come to grief.
The damage was not substantial, but it nevertheless ensured that Valentin took a little more care of, if nothing else, his own scalp. Watch his head under this bridge. Music and the arts are areas of expression that have blossomed in today's Russia. In a recently restored theatre dedicated to a former baron, we watch traditional Russian folk music played in a very unconventional manner. The group's director, Vladimir Drachov, is also its most talented performer. That entree to St. Petersburg is the prelude to more matters distinctly Russian. Stolen coaches, worsening shortages and crazy fountains.
Fall out, Greg.
Exploring St. Petersburg in the coach once owned by Catherine the Great. Its current owner is Boris, an irrepressible Russian who borrowed the gold-gilded carriage from a museum and just never got around to returning it. Down the busy Nevsky Prospect, Boris takes us to the opulent palace at Petroveritz, built as a summer refuge by Peter the Great. His sense of humour remains in the form of a trick fountain that erupts when you step on certain stones.
You got to press one of these.
Close by, a moving reminder of the horrors of war. In the Piskarovsky Cemetery, the remains of a large part of St. Petersburg's population, starved or bombed to death during the 900-day siege here in World War II.
It's only when you walk through these mass graves and see the pieces of bread and the flowers that were left by people that come and pay their respects here that you get the full feeling of those 600,000 people that were starved to death in that 900-day siege in the Second World War.
Hard to believe too that this is all they had to eat. This was their daily ration. No wonder on such small quantities of nourishment that 10,000 people died of starvation every single day.
Almost 50 years after that monumental tragedy, the memories remain vivid. Next, we travel south to Moscow. Alex detained by the militia, a kissing camel, and the Kremlin Couturier. Midnight in Moscow. We're in Red Square, the geographical and historical heart of a city that is home to 8 million Russians. Daylight shows the full richness of the area we're about to explore. Mikhail Gorbachev and his Politburo once governed from within these massive red brick walls. And yet this city within a city also boasts such diversity as the world's biggest bell. The brilliant gold turrets of Cathedral Square. And the gigantic Tsar Cannon.
Boy, I wouldn't like to be on the other side of this cannon, Greg.
They're huge, huge cannonballs and never ever fired on either war or peace.
In neighbouring Red Square, the rainbow-coloured eccentric spires of St Basil's.
Yes, and the legend goes that Ivan the Terrible, when he asked the two architects that built St Basil's if they could make a more beautiful building, and they obviously replied yes, he punished them by blinding them, poking out their eyes.
And Lenin's tomb, the mausoleum where the instruction "no cameras" is rigidly enforced, as we were to find out. Lenin is still regarded as a god by some Russians, with this tomb the focal point of their worship. Many queue here each day to see his mummified body. No event demonstrates the significance of his tomb more than the changing of the guard. It was while we were queuing to enter Lenin's tomb that soldiers inspected Alex's bag, only to find a small camera she'd forgotten about. She was detained and marched straight out of the building.
I didn't realise that you just couldn't take a camera. I mean,
After that incident, Alex was far more observant of official instructions. That sobering experience motivated us underground. The metro stations with their chandeliers and mosaic tiles are works of art, and there's a train every minute. Our intention now is to visit Arbat Street, home of free expression in the new era.
Here is the perestroika, the restructuring that we've been told about happening right here in the streets of Moscow.
And finally, don't you notice that we can see a few smiling faces?
Here we find speakers airing their views without fear of retribution. And notice boards with the latest news besieged. But changing money on a thriving black market still leads to frequent arrests. Religion is also tolerated once more, as we found on a visit to the nearby 14th century Danilov Monastery. Stalin wiped out the church in the USSR, but the latest administration has returned this building back to the Russian Orthodox Church. Free speech and religion are one thing, an empty stomach another. Here in the enormous GUM department store, food and goods are chronically short, with long queues everywhere and new supplies pounced on the moment they're delivered. It's only in the bookstores that the sweeping changes are most evident. Nowhere in the USSR are the policies of glasnost and perestroika, as seen on this popular poster, more evident than in bookstores.
Books like Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn have only recently been published after a very long ban.
Fashion too is undergoing a revolution, with designer Vyacheslav Zaitsev leading the way. This Kremlin couturier is the darling of Moscow's upper class. His fashions sell for up to $600 a piece for the few who can afford it. And remarkably, Zaitsev gets to keep the healthy profits. Coming up, skating bears, teary weddings, and the Soviets' freshest talent. Moscow and its famous circus are legendary. Half a dozen troupes from the circus constantly tour the world, while in Moscow, time-honoured routines are constantly perfected. But it's with the animals that the Muscovite trainers really excel. Take this camel, for instance, a camel that kisses. The other new act we loved were the cumbersome polar bears on skates. Our final day in Moscow was spent at the Palace of Weddings, a production line process where one bride steps out and another steps in. We were greeted by a very stylish young couple, Inna and Valery, two 20-year-old students. Their service came complete with a chamber orchestra and a celebrant performing her 20th wedding that day. It was a touching ceremony, with Inna and Valery to holiday at our next destination, the Ukraine. We've arrived in the Ukraine, breadbasket of the USSR.
This city, Kiev, was founded 1,500 years ago, capital of ancient Russia and home of the famous Cossacks.
Kiev is the third largest city in the Commonwealth of Independent States. Its population swelled by survivors from around the nuclear power station disaster at nearby Chernobyl. Amongst Kiev's long-term residents, a very fanatical chess player who completes his game in a few seconds.
Oh, game over.
Видите? Нельзя за снимок.
I think I lost that.
Well done.
I think I lost that in about 10 seconds flat.
Понимаю, ничего, говорю.
We leave the eccentric chess champion to witness the cream of Kiev's younger talent. This group of Bolshoi ballet hopefuls gathers every afternoon for rehearsals. The Young Pioneers Palace conducts activities after school for 3,000 local children. Activities ranging from drama and craft to this dance school. Many of the graduates of this Young Pioneers Palace go on to join professional troupes, the most respected local body being the Ukrainian State Folk Choir. Their performance typifies the intense dedication and commitment of so many Soviets we were to meet, amongst them the sporting heroes of Kiev. Kiev boasts a profusion of sporting stars. From this city alone came 7 gold medalists at the Seoul Olympics. Each afternoon, 5,000 local children undergo intensive training, some of them as young as 5 years old. And even though acrobatics has yet to become an Olympic event, the trainers are very proud of achievements in other international events.
We have only world champions.
That evening, we pause at a local restaurant to reflect on the profusion of talent we've just seen, only to be overwhelmed by dancers of a decidedly Western influence. Coming up next, gypsies, faith healers and mud baths as we travel south to the Black Sea.
Alex, this is Odessa. It's the pearl of the Black Sea. And of course, it's one of the biggest commercial shipping ports in the Soviet Union.
And isn't it exciting to think that Jason and the Argonauts and Ulysses would have taken their ships rowing around here, exploring these waters?
Our cruise into Odessa takes us past a replica of a Viking oarboat being rowed right around the Black Sea by a band of modern-day adventurers. As we step ashore, a crazy fisherman who not only limited the size of his catch by fishing through a very small hole on the wharf, but also insisted on mocking up a pretend catch for our cameras. On a day of pouring rain and widespread local flooding, Alex and I take to Odessa's trolley buses to watch local women at work. Almost all of the bus drivers here are women, as are 70% of the area's doctors. En route, we chance upon some gypsies whose spirits were anything but dampened by the incessant rain. Later, we don joggers to see some of Odessa's more famous landmarks.
Well, this is the wet but very famous gateway to Odessa, the Potemkin Steps.
That's right, on the battleship Potemkin, the sailors mutinied against the officers in 1905 because they were made to eat rancid soup.
You know, there used to be 200 steps up here. There are only 192 now because 8 of them subsided. Feel like a jog?
Sure, anything.
You're crazy in the rain. Let's go.
Our jog takes us back to the Krasnaya, our glorious old in-tourist hotel where a most unusual guest is staying.
Well, it's just gone 7 o'clock and a phenomenon sweeping the USSR is about to happen on television.
Доброе утро. Сегодня наша встреча будет посвящена воздействию на...
You're watching Alain Schumacher, a television faith healer who claims he can cure medical ailments of thousands of his viewers simply by transmitting peaceful signals. These intriguing moments of television silence prompt us to meet the man himself. The medical profession remains highly sceptical of Alain Schumacher's powers, but not so his vast following throughout the region.
I received 100,000 telegrams which approve the good result of my cure. And of course, as to results, they're just unbelievable, fabulous.
Alex decides to test him out.
Ellen, I've got, whenever I run, my cartilage inside my knee hurts.
Вот когда я бегу, вот у меня здесь что-то в середине, может быть, вы... Please, relax.
Oh.
Yes. Only listen to this.
What followed was 15 minutes of silence, broken only occasionally by Elaine's measured hand movements.
Ну вот и все. И это можно делать на любом расстоянии.
Amazingly, Alex's leg hasn't played up since. If nothing else, Alain Schumacher demonstrates the enormous power that television is having on the country's way of life.
Экономические санкции против Панамы.
Праздник газеты «Унита».
Как мы уже сообщали, Ассоциация исследователей космоса осуществляет проект космической рекламы, связанный с запуском космического корабля.
There's a nationwide breakfast program known as 120 Minutes, featuring Western-style commercials.
Одеколон Диско 2 для молодежи. Парфюмерная фабрика.
Как улучшить медицинское обслуживание сельских тружеников и что для этого могут сделать сами колхозы?
And as in a democracy, reports critical of government failures are commonplace.
In economy, in politics, and in everything, I think we change it very slowly.
It means that we are coming from some kind of abnormal thing, you know, back to normal.
In the classrooms we visit, students express their own personal feelings about the Glasnost revolution.
Glasnost is one of the most important parts of the real democracy and freedom.
It's a door to literature, literature which was closed for me.
The opportunity to speak and read free and not to be repressed after this.
Among the endless rows of high-rise housing blocks, we're invited to visit a typical Soviet family. Prachovya Sugovnaya lives in a small flat with 5 other people, her parents, husband and 2 daughters. One of the girls, Danya, shows me how they utilise each of their 4 small rooms, using convertible lounges to form beds at night. And they tell us how their family income totals $100 each week, of which $10 goes towards renting this flat from the local council. Of interest to me was a small ID book they carry everywhere, recording such facts as their school results and driving licence to marriage details. Later, Prachovya and Danya take us to a therapeutic centre on the edge of the Black Sea, where a mixture of mud and sulphur are claimed to cleanse and rejuvenate the body.
Well, if you weren't sick before you started this treatment, you might well end up that way, let me tell you.
It feels like hot wax. Huh? It's quite a nice feeling, actually, isn't it?
You pardon me if I look a little pained.
This is going to help my knee problems, I think.
How are you going, Al?
I've actually had quite a strange sort of fascination with mud. I've always wanted to sort of just dive into a mud pool.
I think I've had enough. Yeah. Can somebody unwrap me?
The sulphur and mud mix certainly smelt foul, but left us both with a long-lasting warm glow on our legs. It also spurred us to take on one of Odessa's other famous pursuits, a night at the Grand Old Opera House. It was a night of cultural confusion for us, English-speaking Australians listening to an Italian opera in the middle of the Soviet Union. It was our final night in Odessa, before we moved on to meet the generous Georgians. So many of them lived for so long, with a way of life very different to what we'd seen so far. The mountains of Georgia. This rich and rugged countryside is our entree to a hugely interesting country. The people of the Transcaucasia are among the world's oldest civilizations, and their history of living to a very old age is well documented. We find the long-lifers, as they're known, everywhere, all of them with their own secrets for why they've lived beyond a century. They sleep for only 6 hours a night on hard beds. They work all the time and eat plenty of vegetables and milk products. They've even set up a centre for gerontology, which has found almost 20,000 people over 100 in Georgia, many of them claiming to be up to 160 years old. In the markets, we discover a warmth and generosity amongst the Georgians. At their frequent roadside marketplaces, they shower us with gifts: fruit, wine, flowers. Among their handiwork, hats knitted from local wool.
How would you feel herding your sheep and having to wear a hat of the same material?
I feel like Zsa Zsa Gabor, I think.
Yeah. High fashion. Well, I think, actually, in all seriousness, I think I could handle a set of those.
Yeah, that's nice. No little one.
And at improvised roadside fireplaces, our favourite Georgian dish: barbecued pork, souvlaki style.
So those poor little guys we just saw over the hill, doomed to this fate.
The capital of Georgia, Tbilisi. This was centre of a huge kingdom 8 centuries ago, and these days home to 1 million Georgians. Georgia joined the old Soviet Union soon after the revolution in 1921, but its fiercely independent people have always trodden a path very much their own.
The move for independence has been growing stronger by the day throughout many parts of the Soviet Union. Here in Tbilisi, for instance, outside these Houses of Parliament last April, thousands of Georgians gathered in their bid for independence. Soviet troops responded with sharpened shovels and tear gas, killing 20 people, most of them women.
During our time in Georgia, we saw evidence of a backlash against authority, with the militia heavily questioned as they went about everyday policing. Despite those tensions, Georgia takes on a festive mood on the weekends when Georgians enjoy their sunny streets in droves.
Great.
Another demonstration of generosity.
Amazingly
this is
generous.
A souvenir.
They're just refusing to take money for this.
Yeah.
On Tbilisi's main street, the pleasures of multi-flavoured drinks.
Like a watery milkshake.
Oh, too.
Yeah.
Most unusual, isn't it?
Like an ice cream soda with the soda and the cream mixed together.
Actually, isn't bad, is it, really?
While further down the road, the delights of freshly baked Georgian bread. But the real treat came from these wagons, loaded with a very unusual beverage, a syrup made from bread and known as kvass.
Like we're having here, and they're pretty good value, I think.
Looks like a very heady beer to me. You've got to drink the Georgian way. This is what I learned to drink last night. Here we go.
It
You know what
tastes
it tastes
a bit
like?
like
Golden syrup.
cordial.
It's
Yeah,
like
golden syrup and water.
Yes, exactly. How the hell are we going to get through the rest of this?
I think that means break a leg.
For our last evening, we go backstage to watch the Rustaf folk singers and dancers preparing for a concert. Mia is celebrating her 22nd birthday, and we join her in a pre-concert toast.
Oh, nein. Ich habe ein Konzert.
Yeah.
Then it's showtime, with famous Georgian battles celebrated in song and dance. The culmination of this energetic performance was this remarkable routine. Our final moments in the USSR are spent back amongst the people we've come to admire so much. The Sunday morning markets of Tbilisi attract the full gamut of Georgian characters, and we were anxious to savour as much of this atmosphere as possible. As our journey comes to an end, we reflect on the changing times we've witnessed, changes of historic proportions. It was as if this entire trip had been but a glimpse of an economic and political system struggling to survive.
It's been an enlightening experience, travelling right across the Soviet Union these past few weeks.
The policies of perestroika and glasnost are slowly starting to take effect. While the fruit may be plentiful in this Georgian marketplace, there are still severe shortages of food and goods throughout the Soviet Union.
But the 280 million people that make up this vast land are still waiting for the real power to the people as promised by Lenin more than 70 years ago.